Got it. Got
after
it.
he pressed
Okay.
the old ones.
So at the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, it was not written on just one parchment, right? It was written on leaves. It was written on goat skin, camel skin, bones, etc., etc. Okay. Then, but at the same time, remember we have the oral tradition as well, which is a lot more reliable than the written tradition, because the written tradition could have scribal errors in there, right? People could add their own notes in there. Okay. So you have the oral tradition simultaneously with the written that was available as well. After Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, he died, right? And during his lifetime, by the way, there were many, many Muslims, many companions that actually memorized the Quran cover to cover even after his passing, right? So what happened was at the time of the first Khalifa, which was Abu Bakr, radiallahu anhu, right? At that time, there was a battle that took place, and I think 70 odd Huffaz, which were the memorizers of the Quran, they died, right? So Umar radiallahu anhu, the second Khalifa eventually that took over from Abu Bakr, he actually suggested to Abu Bakr that why don't you actually make a written copy as well, since the Huffaz, the memorizers, a lot of them they died. That does not mean that there were no more left, because he himself was a memorizer. Abu Bakr was a memorizer. Ali was a memorizer. Uthman was a memorizer, right? And Zayd ibn Thabit, so many of them, who was a personal scribe, which is his name is actually on the list. Ubay ibn Qab, he's on the list, right? So many of these companions, they were still alive in this particular time that I'm referring to, right? So he asked him, why don't you compile, sorry, why don't you write it on one parchment, right? They did that, right? All the companions, they checked it, right? Then this particular Quran was handed over to Hafsa, who was the daughter of the second Khalifa, Umar Anhu, and the wife of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Remember, the Prophet is dead at this time, right? Then what happened was at the time of the third Khalifa, Uthman Anhu, there was a battle that took place where they actually, Islam spread quite a bit to even the non-Arabs, right? And a lot of these people, they actually came to help out Muslims, obviously, in during battles and whatnot, right? So while they were praying, while they were reciting, when they got together, people from different areas, they got together. When they were reciting, they noticed there were some differences in the way they were reciting certain words and certain verses, right? In the pronunciation, ahruf, qirat, etc., right? So they started fighting with each other as to whose qira'at was better, right? They actually did not know that originally Quran was revealed in 7 different ahruf, right? That are just ahruf would be like equivalent to dialects, right? To accommodate 7 different tribes within Arabia, right? So they were not aware of those different ahruf, because all 7 of them, according to our tradition, they all are from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. So what Uthman radiallahu anhu did when he saw this particular issue, another companion walked up to him and told him, people are fighting and they don't know this, that all of what they're reciting, it is correct, right? So why don't you try to unite the ummah, right? By making one skeletal text, since we don't need the other dialects anymore. The Qurayshi dialect is sufficient. So what he did was he made one skeletal text and he burned the other ones that may have even personal copies of the people, because remember, these were not canonized books. These were not like, these are just personal copies. Like I have my own personal copy, right? So you see over here, I've written down so many things over here. So people actually, we know from the tradition, so many hadith actually even say this, right? That Aisha radiallahu anha, she made her own, she had her own copy of the Quran and she wrote notes in there. So for instance, if the Prophet would say something, an interpretation of a particular verse, or he would say, hey, this is a very good dua, this is a very good supplication from the Quran. So a companion, for his reminder, he would actually write it down in his personal copy, that this is actually very good dua. I'm pretty sure you do that with your own Bible, right? Now, what happened was, remember, it's not a printed copy, right? So you cannot tell the difference between, like, nowadays we've got highlighters, we've got, if you write something with a pen, I can tell that that's your own personal notes versus a printed copy. Back then, They did not have the luxury of that, right? So what happened was Uthman Razilan, who he actually called all those copies, he burned all of those, which is actually part of our tradition, that whenever we want to dispose of the Quran, we don't, throw it away like that, because it's the words of God. We either burn it, or we even put it in water or something so it could wash away the ink from the parchment or the paper or whatever, right? And that's what he did. It was not because it was a different Quran, because all of the companions, there was a list, huge list of the companions. I have the names of all of the companions that were part of that committee, that were from the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, right? Because remember, these people, they would actually go at each other for even mispronouncing a single syllable. So how could Uthman radiallahu anhu or any other Khalifa add or subtract something from the Quran and they could get away with it? It would be impossible. It would actually, they would go to battle, war against that Khalifa, that particular person. And he did that with the consensus of all of the most of the companions, because there were initially some against this idea, right? But then later on, they understood and even they agreed, right? So that's how it happened. But it's not a different Quran, it's the same Quran. Does that make sense?